Hey friends, and welcome back to the Alex Makes VR podcast. In today's episode, I want to talk about setting and planning goals for the new year. Now, of course, this is the last episode I'm recording for 2020. It's very poignant. A lot of you listening in real time will probably be thinking about New Year's resolutions and what you hope to achieve and what you want to do in 2021. But you might also be listening in the future. You might be listening on a random day in March and you're thinking, can I still get something from this episode, or is this specifically a New Year's resolution episode? No, the principles I want to talk about in this episode, the way that I plan and set goals, you can do this throughout the year. You can do this whenever you are listening. There is never a better time to start than right now, whenever you are listening. So let's get into today's episode. But before I do, if you've got a question or a subject you want me to talk about in future episodes, I would love to hear from you. It's Alex Makes VR on Instagram and Twitter, especially you guys that have been listening throughout the year since I started this podcast. And if you've not reached out to say hello yet, I would love to hear from you. Podcasting is one of those strange formats where, of course, unless you're talking to guests constantly, it's a bit of you're talking to yourself, basically. It's like kind of talking to a wall. So hearing from you guys makes my day. It also reconfirms to me that I'm not just speaking to myself, although let's face it, I am just wandering around my room talking to my iPhone, but it doesn't feel like that when I hear from you. So please do reach out. Alex Makes VR on Instagram and Twitter. And if you enjoy these episodes and you want to be notified when they go live, I also have a newsletter where I send out my best tips and tricks and the links to the episodes when they're live every single Monday. If you want to sign up for that, you can do that at alexmakesvr.com. Okay, so where should you start when planning and setting goals? For me personally, I really like to define the kind of categories that I want to make progress in. So for me personally, I split goals into personal goals, business goals, and creative goals. So that's what I would recommend you do first, is think about those three key areas of life, whether business means to you, just where you're employed or your side hustle, or if you are a business owner, thinking about what you want to get done next year. Maybe it's an area that you want to improve in. Maybe it's something entirely new that you want to kind of have a look at that haven't. So have a think about what those areas are. Three areas to me seems quite doable. I wouldn't recommend having loads of different areas because sometimes that can feel overwhelming. But I also wouldn't necessarily just have one goal. I mean, you can do what you want ultimately, but definitely have a think about those key areas of life and what goals you want to set. Now, I like to have both a results-based goal and an action-based goal. We've talked about this in previous episodes of the podcast, but for those of you who haven't listened before, or maybe those of you who just need a refresh, a results-based goal is something like, I want to make a 360 video. That's a results-based goal. I want to make a 360 film, results-based. An action-based goal is every week I'm going to take my 360 camera and film something interesting. That's an action-based goal. Do you see the difference? So one of them is a result. One of them is I want to have this outcome. I want to have this completed thing. It's this future thing that doesn't exist yet. And it's kind of quite disconnected from your present self. It's disconnected from what you're doing right now. And also it doesn't naturally give you any incentive or structure or any obvious way of achieving it because it's a final thing. It's an outcome. Whereas an action-based goal is something that you do. The reason I like this is because when you are working towards an outcome, when you are trying to achieve a specific thing, all you're really focusing on is this thing that doesn't exist yet, or it's something that you haven't done yet. It's almost like it's a negative before you've even started, isn't it? Because it's looking to the future for this thing that doesn't yet exist. Whereas an action-based goal will allow you to focus on the thing that you are showing up every day to do. It's something that is in your control. It's something positive that you can take action every single day. And you can say, yeah, do you know what? Like, I can't control, you know, how quickly I can turn around this thing. I can't control outside circumstances or all these other people that determine whether or not I make that project or land that sale or get to that next level with my podcast, whatever it is. I can't control those metrics. I can't control those things. But what I can control is showing up every day and taking action on it. So for me with the podcast, it might be that like an outcome goal, for example, not that this is one, but just off the top of my head, just thinking about it, you know, okay, so I don't know, I want the podcast to be in the top 100 top tech podcasts next year. That's something that I can't control. That's something that's like a negative because it's like, well, I'm not there. So technically, you know, it's like I'm chasing this thing that doesn't yet exist. Whereas what I can say is instead of making that the outcome goal, I can say an action-based goal is I want to do the podcast every single week next year. Or maybe I want to go up to, you know, I want to put out a podcast twice a week for at least 3 months of the year next year, or something where I have complete control over it. You know, it's not, there aren't external factors that control whether I make a podcast because that is completely within my control. So I've laboured the point enough on that one, I realise. So it's really important that if you are going to set goals that are outcome-based, that you also attach an action to it. Another thing that kind of relates to this is, and this is something that I've heard a few times over the last kind of few weeks, because I've been kind of in that mindset of thinking about goals, is most people really overestimate how much they can do, especially in a year. I think we all think that we're superhuman or something, and we think a year's that's loads of time. And it is, but it also isn't. It's enough to kind of show up and make actions and make progress towards something. But again, you have no idea what's going to happen. Another pandemic could hit, God forbid. Something could happen, you know, in your family, like something could like take you off, an opportunity could like take you off and do something else and take you away for a few months, which means that you've stepped away from the goal that you had. So don't make really, really massive outcome-based goals that realistically might not be achievable within a year, but instead make smaller immediate goals that you can achieve within 90 days. So imagine if you could achieve 4 things in a year. That's a lot, especially when it comes to like business and creative. If you could make like 4 projects a year, that would actually be pretty insane, right? Like even creating one thing a year would be really, really impressive because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of planning and lots of other circumstances to make anything these days. So imagine making 4 things a year, right? That's 90 days. So you've got 4 goals in like a category like business, for example. So maybe the immediate goal is, okay, for the next 90 days, I'm going to focus on landing 1 5-figure client. That's my goal for the first 90 days of the year. And then my next goal, you know, you can reevaluate after 90 days and then you set your next goal based on what you've just achieved. So instead of making, you know, a big goal that lasts the whole year that might not hold your attention or might feel too difficult to kind of comprehend and stick to for a year, or it might just be a goal that actually would be really difficult to achieve within a year, make an immediate goal that you can do within the first 3 months. Of course, you could also do like a monthly goal if you want, and you could reflect at the end of each month and like recalibrate. That's also a great way to do it. But 90 days gives you enough time to make something quite big happen. Like 90 days, I would say for most people is enough to make, you know, quite a big project or land quite a big client, whereas a month actually is quite a short amount of time. So maybe you could land a smaller client, or maybe you could make progress on a project, or maybe you could finish like one aspect of a project like the script, or, you know, get the planning in place for the production or something. But to actually achieve something within a month is quite it's quite aggressive target. So second tip, having immediate goals. So the first tip was setting goals in particular categories and make them action-based goals. Tip number 2 is setting quite immediate goals. Think about what you can achieve in a month or 90 days. And then tip number 3, really, and I realise I've just turned this into like a list of like 3 tips when it wasn't really originally. I was just planning on rambling about it, but it just seems to have ended up that way. Tip number 3 is make sure that you schedule time to reflect on those goals or on that progress that you're making. And don't hold yourself to goals that you made in the past, okay? Like, for example, my goals this year, obviously massively derailed thanks to the pandemic. So thankfully, I have a process where I actually reflect weekly about things that I'm doing and kind of course correct. But I also, every month or every quarter, will kind of like have a reflection session and be like, okay, what did I do this month? What would I like to do next month? Like, have I made progress on the bigger goals that I've set? And that allows you to then course correct if things come up or if opportunities come up that take you off, or if, like, you know, you've been making progress on a project, but it's not quite going the way that you want. Like, you can course correct and say, okay, well, I've tried that for a month or a quarter. Now, what can I do? What can I do that's different? What can I kind of change? What action can I kind of change or do something differently in order to make progress? And that only happens when you have scheduled reflection time. So like I say, for me, I reflect pretty much every week. Since the beginning of the year, I've actually been doing a kind of personal progress video. And it started because when I made Key to Like back in 2016, I never actually made a log of that process. It just kind of, I just did it, and then I couldn't really remember the process. And it was really difficult to go from being like someone that wrote a script one random kind of day sitting on a bench by some padlocks in Vancouver to being someone that was on stage at Raindance Film Festival talking about this project that, you know, had kind of come to fruition and turned out to be one of the world's first rom-coms in VR. Like, that process like happened so quickly, and I wish that I had kept a log. So one of my things for this year was I'm going to start a log for Bad News, which is my next kind of big drama project, so that I can look back on it. Now, of course, it's ended up becoming just a weekly progress kind of update for myself as well, about like what goals what I've done that week, what goals I've achieved, what have I been thinking, feeling, what do I want to do for next week, and then that kind of helps me clear some clutter in my mind to have a think about all of the things that I've done or haven't done, and also refocus on what it is that I want to do going into the next week. So whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, make sure that you schedule some time to reflect on your goals and make sure that you are showing up. Another thing that I like to do actually recently, I've only started doing this the last couple of months, but it really helps, is I've kind of boiled down my immediate goals into a little bit of a mantra, almost like just a couple of sentences. And I write that out every single day. And the reason I do that is it kind of reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, you know, I still, even though we're very, very close now to the end of 2020, I still have things that I've been working towards this year, or like things that I'm showing up and doing every day to take action towards certain projects. And every single day just puts me in the right mindset to write out a mantra that kind of permeates all aspects of my life, my personal life, my business life, my creative life. And by writing that down every single day, it reminds me why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So that's also quite a big tip. And it's not something for everyone. It can be a little bit wooey, but sometimes you have to remind yourself like why it is you're doing what you're doing. We talk about that a lot in terms of business, right? Reverse engineering why it is you want to do what you want to do. So even just having a think about when you're setting these goals, why is it that you are setting those goals? What life is it that you're trying to build? What kind of person is it that you want to become by doing those things, by doing those projects, by making progress in those areas? And just make sure you're checking in with that, because sometimes, especially in the creative world, we can get caught up in just doing the next thing, the next best thing, like the next best bit of tech that, got to one-up ourselves constantly. But why? Like, what life are we trying to build for ourselves? What is your why? Like, for me, when I started my business, originally it was, admittedly, it was money focused. It was like, I've wanted to be self-sustaining. I've wanted to like being able to make my own money. I want to have enough money to like get myself out of debt and, have a life and build the life that I want for myself. But like now my why is totally changed. Like my why is more about, well, how do I want to help people? Whether that is through my creative projects, whether that is through the podcast that I put out, whether it's through my personal life, like how do I want to show up? What kind of person do I want to be? So before you even set your goals and during that reflection process, make sure that your goals actually align with that future version of life that you're aiming for. And if if you change what that why is, if you change what the life is that you're aiming for, because actually you achieve it or you get it and you're like, oh, it's not actually what I wanted. I don't actually want to spend 9 months out of the year stressed out of my mind, working stupid hours a day, doing a contract or doing a project that I thought would fulfill me, but actually in practice, it doesn't. So, let's go back to the drawing board. Instead of working towards that goal, now I want to find a goal where I've got a bit more work-life balance, where I get to see more of the world, where I get to connect with like-minded individuals and make smaller things that I'm passionate about rather than these big fancy projects or whatever it might be for you. Take that time to reflect, take that time to align yourself with the why that you're doing all of this in the first place. With that being said, that's it for this episode. I hope that helps setting and planning your goals. Again, this can be done at any time of year, not just the new year, but January 1st does seem like a nice little metaphor for the start of something new. And for those listening in real time, obviously it's been a really, really difficult year, and well done you for getting through it, and well done you for being the kind of person that is still showing up and listening to a podcast like this, which is supposed to help you kind of navigate those big ideas and those big kind of like thoughts and these new paths in life. So give yourself a pat on the back. We made it. And that in itself is an accomplishment. Set some goals for yourself next year and let me know what they are if you fancy talking about them, or if you fancy telling me your different ways of setting goals. If you've got your own systems in place, or things that you like to do, traditions that you do every new year, reach out to me, Alex Makes VR on Instagram and Twitter. With that being said, this will be the last episode for 2020. Thank you so much to every single one of you who has shown up and listened to the podcast. Genuinely has made my year. And like I say, you never know what's going to happen in life, and you never know what's going to force you to reevaluate and change those goals. And sometimes that will come from reflection and intentional circumstances, or sometimes it will be a massive global pandemic that changes all of your plans and wipes out all of your goals overnight. And this is probably the best thing that has come from this year. And actually, I think this has been a pretty life-changing year for many of us. So thank you for being part of that for me. Thank you for being part of that big change that I know is going to be the thing that I look back on and say, do you know what, 2020 for a lot of people was a real shit show. For me, though, this seed that I started during lockdown, on the verge of an emotional breakdown, has now become the thing that I love more than anything. So thank you for listening. Have a great start to your new year, wherever you are in the world. I'll speak to you in 2021.